The Drum Candy Podcast is brought to you by Drum Factory Direct.
What's up, everybody? Welcome into episode 4 of season 4 of the Drum Candy Podcast. This is your host, Mike Dawson, coming to you from Drum Factory Direct in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This week, I'm handing over the interview duties to my good friend, Tom Wendt, and he is talking to his friend, Mike Melito. Mike Melito is a Rochester, New York-based drummer, and he currently teaches at the prestigious Eastman School of Music. So I'm going to hand it over to Tom and enjoy the show.
Hey folks, Thomas Wendt back again, guest hosting another Drum Candy podcast. Such a pleasure to be here. And today I have the pleasure of spending some time with my very good friend, the wonderful Mr. Mike Melito from Rochester, New York. Mike is a fantastic player who's been on the scene there for years. And he is also an incredibly dedicated teacher. I'm looking forward to talking with him today. So let's get started. All right. So we are welcoming the fantastic Mike Melito to the Drum Candy Podcast. Mike, thank you so much for being here. It's an absolute pleasure to have you, man.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So I thought we could start and talk about kind of how you came to the drums and came to jazz music, because you're from Rochester, New York, and you are part of a pretty amazing legacy of jazz musicians from the upstate New York area. I think a lot of people aren't really aware that there's a lot of great players from that area, and there's still a lot of great players like you that are there, and you're part of that great legacy. So could we maybe start with, how did you come to play the drums, and how did you come to jazz music?
Pretty well. I came from to the drums pretty much through my older brother Tom, who's a drummer, and he pretty much got me started into everything.
Wow.
But I will have to say this. I grew up in a very musical family, so my father loved jazz, so it was always playing in my house when I was a kid. So when I was, just would listen to stuff, it would be like he'd have Art Blakey on, and
Wow.
and I'd be attracted to Blakey, and and then at first it didn't hit me as hard as it did later, because I was really super young,
Okay.
But I was like, wow, that's kind of cool, because all my friends were listening to whatever at the time,
Yeah.
So, but so then I started to get more and more into it. And when I was about probably, I've been playing since I've been maybe, I don't know, it's debatable. It's around 4 maybe.
Wow.
Before I started just behind the drum, not see, but my brother, Tom, really pretty much said, he was going to make me a drummer. I'll never forget. He says, he told my mom, I'm going to make him a drummer. So he kind of took me under his wing, and he,
Wow.
So he helped me with a lot, man, with just about everything. I mean, with playing. So he was, he's 10 years older than I am. So, he was actually, when I really started, he was already playing gigs when he was in his teens, and, so he, so between him and my father and I have another brother, Chris, who's a trumpet player, and so Chris is really into jazz, and he's a really, really good classical trumpet player too. So between those 3 guys, and my sister was actually non-musical, which is
Wow.
But between those 3 guys, they kind of brought me to the drums and to jazz, So my brother would let me sit in on play his drums, early on. There's pictures of when I was just a little tyke holding sticks, and trying to get into the, I hit that. What's this? This is a ride cymbal. Okay,
Wow,
so,
man.
Yeah, I was lucky.
That's really great. So, as far as your earliest memories of practicing and working on things with your brother, what are some of the things that you remember him showing you first, and some of the things that you remember him, having you work on?
A lot of it was pretty much trying to learn to read, and holding the sticks the right way. Because I used to hold the sticks. I remember I played traditional grip. I used to hold them like this, back, like, lefty.
Backwards, yeah. Lefty,
what
yeah.
what I would do is I'd watch him practice a lot. So we had, in our house, we had these stairs that went down like this and the drums were straight ahead. And so I would just sit there and just watch him, and just, try to absorb what I could. And then he would have me come over sometimes and say, okay, now I want you to do this. I want you to play. Okay, don't play like this. I want you to use your wrist and, but it took a long time, as you know, playing this instrument to try to get I'm still working at it.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, absolutely.
But those are the things he kind of got me into, were like reading and rudiments, and then trying to really just develop just some little coordination on the drums, So,
now, did you end up studying with someone else as you got older into your teens?
I did. I ended up studying with this great teacher I had here named John McNeil, who John played in our local orchestra,
Okay.
So I started lessons with him when I was in 5th grade, and I went to 11th grade. Wow. And I wanted to go more, but he cut me off.
He cut you off.
I go, John, man, more, please. Come on, I got some, and he said, no, I think it's, you're good, for now, don't, so, but we went through like the Wilcoxon book, and we went through all the Wilcoxon, and then we went through the Cerrone book, and a lot of the books, and a lot of coordination stuff he got me into.
Interesting. What kind of coordination stuff? I'm just curious. Like, do you remember like certain exercises or certain things, that he showed you?
Well, the one thing he kind of got me into was those Joe Rothman books. The ones that go like with the bone, between the 16th notes between the hi-hat, the limb, all the limbs. So he got me into that, and the Chapin book.
Okay,
He got me into the Chapin book when I was about 14 or 15.
Yeah. Interesting. Very cool. So as far as, your first experiences playing music, what were some of those?
Well, my father, like I said before, was a trumpet player, so I don't think I actually said that before, but anyways,
that's right.
So, he was a trumpet player, and so he would get me out like on he'd play these wedding gigs sometimes. So a lot, actually. And so he would bring me out when I was about 15 and start letting me play, and sometimes my drum teacher was a drummer on the gig. So it was, he would just that was a great experience to play, not only just with my dad, because he's my dad, and he knew so much about the music, but, we would play we weren't playing really hardcore jazz or nothing. It was wedding stuff, just little tunes and commercial gigs. And he would, he would always tell me, and some of the guys he hired were really great jazz players. And they would always say, when you're playing for dancers, you can't play Philly Joe, you can't go, trying to, not to say that I could really do that a lot, but I was really into that,
Sure.
So they said, man, you got to keep it simple and keep it swinging and just play. Don't play too much,
Yeah.
And just play for the dance,
It's really I think some of the best training for musicians, no matter what style you end up playing, playing for dancers is really, it's a unique experience. I think it's really important because I think it helps connect you with the physicality of music in a way. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that was huge. That's why I mentioned that before anything, because, I thanked my father a number of times for letting me sit in and, let me play. And, then he started to hire me when I was about 16, maybe 16, but he made me learn like a merengue, and he, all kinds of stuff he wanted me to be sure I was up on. And, and he said, he goes, you got to remember, it's not a hard bebop gig, it's but the thing is, what I learned from that and brought that really, as I'm talking here, really helped me realize was that, jazz really was played for dancers, I mean,
absolutely.
And so, you listen to all those great records that we have and the videos that we have now, and they're playing, some of the most swinging music is for, it's, you're making it feel good.
Absolutely.
So you could, anything that makes you feel good, you're going to want to dance,
No, absolutely. And I remember the first time I had an elder tell me that, oh yeah, we used to dance to Charlie Parker records. We used to dance to Blue Note records. And it makes sense because those records feel so great, so it makes all the sense in the world. You're right. If it feels good, you can dance to it.
Right. Exactly. So, I remember from there, I got a Joe Locke, the vibes player, and my brother Tom were really good friends because they both lived in Rochester at the same time. So they played a lot together and they were really close at the time. So Joe would come over to the house like a lot. So, and he tried to get me to play and I'd be afraid, sometimes. Man, I would play, but he'd say, okay, now you got to come out to, and I'm still like 15, 16 years old. He goes, all right, I want you to come out to this jam session. And I remember, he goes, and I want you to sit in. He goes, it's the only way you're really going to get. And I said, man, I'm not good enough to do that. I can't do that. What are you, crazy? I'm like a 16-year-old kid. You guys are like, in your 20s, So they made me try to get me out there playing. They said, look, and they made me realize, they said, the only way you're going to grow is you can't be afraid of the mistakes. He goes, the only way, man, if there's really nothing to worry about here.
Yeah.
Like, and they said, you wouldn't believe who comes to these jams. I mean, they're horrible. These guys they play terrible. Yeah. So, there's nothing to worry about. So that inspiration really helped me because Joe Locke, I think, hired me for my very first jazz gig when I was 16, 17.
Wow.
Yeah. And he was in town. So I played my first jazz gig with. So the great Joe Romano, who became like one of my musical mentors, the great saxophone player, used to play with Woody and Buddy, and so he was actually on all these gigs at this club. They used to have a 4-night-a-week gig here when those existed, or 5 nights. And so Joe was in the house, but he couldn't. He actually couldn't. Obviously, he couldn't be there at the time because I remember he had like a show he was playing. He paid like some money, so I remember he was there, and this great saxophone player Ned Otter. I don't know if you've ever heard of Ned Otter.
Yes,
you know Ned.
Yeah,
Ned was playing. So, so Ned was playing. So I was like, oh man, okay, So I remember we played Autumn Leaves. That was the first thing we played, and I remember Joe goes, okay, we're gonna go ba-da-da-da. Ba-da-da-da. And so I'm like, okay, what happens after that? So I knew the tune, but it's like, so I played it, and I was terrified at first, but man, after the first tune, I was like, I had so much fun. I just forgot all my fears.
Wow.
I just wanted to play all night,
Yeah.
So Joe was in the house, and he I guess he liked what he heard, and what he did was he says, man, I think I have some gigs for you coming up. He goes, I'm going to be calling you. And I said, oh, wow, okay. So I'm thinking, yeah, right. So lo and behold, man, 2 weeks later, he's called me for 3 nights, like at this club. And it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday. I was so young at the time. My parents didn't want me playing Thursdays. I had school in the morning, So they said, man, you can't play till 1 a.m. and go to school, on Thursday. So I did Friday and Saturdays for a couple months, and then he got somebody else to do the Thursday nights, and so that was huge for me, because I learned a lot of the tunes, and I learned a lot. I made a lot of, obviously really, really young, so I was overplaying a little bit, and I was kind of just wasn't sure where I was in the form sometimes, and it was, but those guys were very patient with me, and I made sure that I made a list of tunes I didn't know, and I said, okay, I got to go home and learn this. So I would go and I try to the next day I'd find that tune and I'd learn it, man. And I'd be sure because next time, and I would tell them next time it's going to be better. They saw this hunger in me, as a kid.
Yeah.
So. And another guy I have to say I started to play with was Bill Dobbins, a piano player.
Oh man, yeah.
So Bill was here, and I started playing with Bill when I was really around that same time. So he hired me for some gigs, and the same thing. He called a whole different bunch of trio tunes, And so I said, man, I don't know this one. I gotta learn this.
Wow. Yeah.
So I would write it. I said, okay. And I said, okay. And it was just great. I'm very grateful to all those guys because they were patient with me and they didn't scream at me. They didn't yell at me. They encouraged me.
Yeah.
And I think they saw that I was so hungry for it that I needed it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's such an important part of and I think any musician's development is when you're young and you get a certain amount of stuff together, but you need that experience. You need that time to screw up, to make the mistakes, and to see what that feels like, and to what does it feel like when things are great. Like, you got to learn all of that, and that's such an important thing. I had no idea that Joe Locke figured so prominently into your career. That's really cool, man.
He did. He did. It's funny because I just played with him.
Really?
Yeah, like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks. Yeah, we played a gig up in Utica,
nice.
In Utica, and so we played a gig, and I was telling him about the story, man, because he used to come over and go swimming in my swimming pool. I go, man, I remember you used to try to drown me in my pool, kidding. He used to kind of put my hand.
Yeah.
So it was great to play. We had a ball, So
that's wonderful, man. So let's kind of keep going in your chronology from here. How did things progress for you right after high school? What happened then?
Well, after, I didn't go to college for music, so that was my college. So I pretty much, what I ended up doing was I said, I had a plan. My plan was really to get good enough to teach, just teach privately, So, and I had great teachers, so I had a really good, and I'd always ask questions in the beginning, like, I'm doing this, yep, you're cool, You're all right, man. Just do it, and you're going to learn a lot from the, same thing. So my plan was really not to move to New York. My plan was to stay here, because I figured, there were some great players here. And so I just figured if I can stay here and teach, I can make a decent living and not have to worry about, all these expensive rents and, not only that too, but my mom at the time, she died when I was 18, 19. So she had lung cancer. So I was kind of really torn up by that. So there was no way I could move anywhere at that time, to be honest with you. So I just said, I'm just going to concentrate to do what I have to do to get me to the point where I can teach and play. And I just started to actually lead some of my own groups.
Oh, wow.
In the 90s around town. And freelance, and I started to go. Actually, the great J.R. Montrose, the saxophone player, played with Kenny Dorham,
absolutely,
and Sal Amico, who was an amazing trumpet player.
Yeah,
they lived up in Utica, So I would take my good friend Jimmy Johns was their regular drummer. He was a great drummer. He's still in Syracuse. So Jimmy would have. Sometimes he couldn't make gigs, so he'd keep making, you want to be into coming up? I go, oh, sure, So I went up and started playing with those guys,
Wow.
And so I subbed a lot for Jimmy and JR, he knew I was really into Philly Joe and Blakey and Kluke and he, of course, played with those guys so many times,
Yeah, I'm glad you brought his name up. I wanted to ask you about him.
Yeah, so, and JR he was funny. At first, he was like a real one-on-one guy. He really wouldn't say much to you,
Okay.
I remember the first gig I played with him, he hardly said 2 words to me. So I'm thinking, oh, man, this guy hates me. Yeah, I guess I'm all right, well, it's okay, whatever. I'm like, whatever, So, yeah. And then, I started playing with him more and more, and we started to talk more because he knew I love Philly Joe,
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, and so he just told me that, he and Joe were really tight and, and he always, how Philly Joe does that backwards roll, he goes, so man, can you do that? I go, no, I don't, man, I'm like, I I can't not like him. I mean, you're asking me to play like my hero who you played with. Why would you want me to do it?
Yeah, right.
You know, he was just trying to test me. So Jimmy and I figured out, well, I think it's 3, you know, it's like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And so, which it really was, because there is some debate that there it wasn't, but it definitely was. I saw Vinny Ruggiero, I think, wrote it out, and it's 3. It's not 2.
Yeah, I figured it was 3. I never saw it written out, but just watching his physical motion, it kind of looked and sounded a little bit like 3 to me. That's really amazing, though. So so you played a fair amount with JR then? Yeah,
I did. I did.
Wow.
You know, but JR was funny because, you know, when you played with him, he didn't like brushes. Like,
really?
He hated when you had to play a ballad, it had to be sticks.
Really?
No matter what tempo. So it's ding, ding, good, ding. I mean, it was not even, sometimes it's slower. And so you're trying to play, it's almost like you're trying to play a little Elvin-y thing to fill it out, you know? The triple, gotcha, trying to get things so it doesn't feel so rigid and stiff. You know? Because with the brushes, you can get away with getting some things, you know, moving around a little bit. So that was a challenge.
Yeah,
you know? So I said, wow. But it was a good thing to do because, you know, it puts you in it gets you out of your box, you know.
For sure, yeah.
And when it gets you out of your box, you grow, you know, I think, you know. So you know, but he had a really great time, you know. But I remember JR, I think he got in a car accident. In the late 70s, I believe he did. You know, I shouldn't probably be saying this, but because I'm about 90% sure he did, because he had his teeth came out or got bashed in, so he really couldn't play tempos towards the end. Like I would always ask him, I remember playing with him one night in this club in Utica, and he goes, "What do you want? What do you want to play?" I go, "Man, can we play something like here? Because we're here, like down here all night, man. Can we kind of come up, man? Yeah. You know." So I was like kind of flexing my muscles when I shouldn't have, and so he goes, "I can't go, Mike. I can't go too swift, man. I can't." I said, "Come on, man. You can do. That's all right. This isn't too swift." You know, and so, you know, he goes, "No, you know," and so he would always usually play "I Remember You." He loved to play that theme for Ernie. Sticks.
Wow.
You know, I remember some of the tunes he used to really love to call, like Giant Steps in 3.
Oh yeah,
he'd like to play that. And that was right around the time when he did this duo record with Tommy Flanagan called "A Little Pleasure" on Uptown, I think. And so, you know, I'm thinking, man, this guy, you know. Just like, you know, I really was getting into his playing because when I would go up to actually play with him, I would put on his Blue Note. You know, he's got a Blue Note record with, you know, I know you know it, but it's the one with Ira Sullivan.
Yeah.
Horace Silver, Wilbur, and Philly Joe. And he handpicked that band. I think it was Alfred Lyon that said, you handpicked the band, you know. And I remember listening to that, and I would ask him questions about it. He goes, you know, and he told me, I bet you never heard Horace Silver swing like that. I'll never forget that. Because you never heard him swing like that, you know.
Wow, that's funny. That's
great. He goes, man, he had Philly Joe behind. You ain't going to, you know, and Philly, you never, you know. And it was like, it's not like he loved Horace, obviously, because he wouldn't have had him on the date. But he just had this thing. He goes, man, Philly Joe had an effect on Horace, you know, that, you know, and it did. It was different, but.
I'm gonna have to listen to that record with that in mind now. That's really interesting. I love that record. That's such a great classic record.
Me too, you know. Me too. So, you know, and I would talk to him about just like how, you know, and I think he just saw my hunger. I would just bug the guy to death, you know.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Because I'm a big, as you know, you and I are buddies, and you know, I'm a question asker. You know,
absolutely.
You know, it's like you have Roger Humphrey, so. You know, we were down there when, you know, you took me over to see Roger. I'm asking him, man, so what, you know?
No, that's great.
Could spend all day with that guy. You know?
No, absolutely.
I could spend years.
I know, man, but that's part of why you're knowledgeable is you ask questions.
Yeah, and you learn from the greats, you know? So, you know,
absolutely.
So it's so, you know, so for me, that's kind of what it's, you know, and in my age too now, you know, my 50s, I'm still hungrier than ever, man, for this stuff,
Yeah.
So, that's why, like meeting Roger was such a thrill because, looking at the drums he played, song for my father, he's got in the corner, he got a beautiful house and just the pictures alone tell the story of his,
Yeah, it's really special to be around those guys and just sort of just as people, just to talk to them and just to sort of feel their energy because it's really special, In addition to playing with some of those older masters that are from the upstate New York area, you also have played with a host of masters that have come through the Rochester area. And I was wondering if you could talk about some of those experiences and what you got from some of those guys that you worked with over the years, certain things that you might think have really contributed to your development as a player.
Sure. Well, the first guy that comes to mind is James Moody. I got to play with James Moody. See, Chuck Mangione had this, it said he had this little mini festival called Chuck Lights Up Upstate in 1994.
Oh, wow.
So I remember he had bands like in all these clubs all over the upstate New York for a month, like every night,
Wow.
So he hired me to play with, I was playing with the Schneider brothers, Bob and John, my good buddies, and Chris Potter was playing saxophone in the band. So we played like 2 weeks, and then, so I got to play Moody had heard me with those guys. So we played opposite sets,
Oh, okay.
So he hired me, Chuck and him hired me to play with Moody. So, so Moody was really amazing because, the first time I remember we played, I think, or I met him we were playing in Buffalo, I think, and went to his hotel room and knocked on the door. I think with the Schneiders to meet him, and he was in his bathrobe. And he was practicing, and so he goes, "Yeah," and I go, "Oh, Mr. Moody," I go, "My name is, I'm going to be, we're going to be playing with you." He goes, "Yeah, oh man, great, fellas." He goes, "Beautiful fellas." He always says, "Yeah, fellas, okay, good. I got to get back to my practice, and so I'll see you a little later." So that lesson right there. He was in his 70s. I think he was 70 years old or so at the time. And I remember him telling me, right there, I said, wow, that's like Moody. I'm hearing him with like Kenny Clark and all those records, with everybody. And I'm thinking, man, he's practicing this, at that age. So, when you're 20, whatever I was, I'm thinking if he's still practicing, wow.
I know.
Then that really hit me. So then we would have, I'm trying to make this shorter here.
That's all right.
One thing I'll say is that we had dinner every night when we were playing, together. And so that was a great learning, just the conversations, because he told me he was like in his left ear, maybe he was half deaf. And so he says, it's I like it when you play, because I was bashing, you want me to, bash. So I was hitting pretty hard. And he goes, I like that way you hit hard. He goes, I need that because I need to feel that,
Yeah.
So he says, but he says, he just talked about, like, he didn't say much to me. He just basically was really very nice, but he confided a lot of stuff in me, like about just what he liked, and it was like, and one thing he did have me play. I remember we played he played a flute, a bossa nova flute, and he wanted me to play brushes on it. He goes, and I don't want sweepy thing. I want you to play the brushes like the cymbal, brush in the left hand, like you're playing a bossa nova, but just do that.
Wow.
So I remember, I go, wow, okay, I can try that. I don't think up to that point I ever did that.
Yeah.
So that was very helpful because that I started to be able to do that. I learned, okay, I'm going to learn to do that better.
Yeah.
So that helped. Those little things. So it's little things like that, just that really help tremendously in the development, because it's things, again, it takes you out of your box a little bit, and you start to work on it. Your playing starts to expand a little bit. And one thing too, I will say about getting to play with a lot of these guys was Moody and Benny Golson and a bunch of guys. But the one thing they did say that meant the world to me was they really liked my beat and my time. They told me. So you're beating your time is so solid. And so coming from those guys, because that's what I mainly love to work on,
Sure,
is
absolutely.
the cymbal beat for me. And, and living up in upstate New York, there was a lot of, back in that time, everybody just wanted you to crash your brains out, and you weren't really playing open, open up and open, some of my peers, and I say, nuh-uh, man, I'm not there yet. I want to play.
Yeah.
I want to learn to play that ride cymbal,
Yeah. Yeah.
So those guys kind of secured that I was on the right path. Let's just put it that way. So I'm not saying even agreeing with them. I'm saying it just made me go forward more in that direction of trying to really get that beat and time together, So
yeah, it's so wonderful to get affirmation from those masters, because it can really mean the difference between, I think, a young musician being able to sort of take those next steps and them maybe not doing that or going in a direction that's not so good. So that affirmation is beautiful, man.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And again, I always tell my students, because I teach a lot, I said, the most important thing, whether you're playing like a funk thing, or whether you're playing a swing thing, whether you're playing even real open, even if it's real open music, there's a pulse. If it's open music, but there's a pulse there,
Absolutely.
You got to be sure that pulse is strong, and the spaces, or you got your time together so much that the space it's not going to freak anybody out. If you got four guys that got great time, you can do anything. Really, in my opinion,
totally true. Yeah. Yeah.
And when you play with guys like that, then it's just, nobody gets lost. Everybody's in the same page, and it's kind of, you move a little like this. So if you go in a different direction, I'm not saying not just stay in one box, but I'm just saying if you go in a different direction, things come together. But if your time isn't together, and your beat isn't together, and feel isn't together, and you try to do that.
Totally true.
I mean, I can't tell you how many people have really walked through my doors, man, with going through master's degrees in college and universities and conservatories. And man, I asked them to play time, and they said, I feel like I can't play a cymbal beat.
Wow.
And they play, and I go, wow, what did you learn in college? What did they do?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I would be a little bit, I was a little mad because they spent all that time in college and this, they wouldn't get any of that. And I'm thinking, well, what's this point of learning all this stuff if you don't have, are you playing to records? Are you playing to like those, you putting on like Miles Davis, like, those cooking, relaxing, steaming with Joe, with Philly Joe? Are you playing to Kluke with Bud Powell?
Yeah.
You playing to Papa Joe with the trio on Everest,
Yeah.
Where you play Sweet Georgia Brown, and
absolutely,
you playing, you got to get this stuff,
Yeah.
That's going to really inform, because I think you have to imitate in order to really be your true, strongest individual self.
Absolutely, absolutely true.
And that's kind of what I tell everybody.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important advice, because that you're right. The only way you find your voice is to first mimic someone else's, and yeah, that it's amazing how much, education is out there today.
Exactly.
And so often the most important things are left out of that, unfortunately. Now, as far as teaching goes, this is something I've actually been wanting to talk to you about. The times we've hung out, we haven't really talked a lot about this, but I wanted to talk to you about teaching and about some of your philosophies about it, and some of the things that you do with some of your different students, because I'm somewhat new to teaching as far as, really sort of doing it. I've only been doing it for about 7 or 8 years. I've done it a little bit longer with in some other ways, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts about it and some of your teaching philosophies.
Well, I think the biggest thing for me is like trying to get people to kind of get a stroke developed first,
Okay.
Or if they're playing traditional grip, that turn, getting that turned, right?
That's right.
The wrist.
That's right.
So I work a lot. Every student I have goes through rudiments with me, like every lesson. I don't care if you're like whatever your level you're at, it's rudiments. And so I get them to memorize all their rudiments, and I get them to try to play them once they can get the real serious students really work hard at it, man.
Sure.
It's good because you start to see like the development of if they play this is happening, and so that's one of the things I work on, because I always tell them, if you're playing the drums like this, like a robot, it's going to sound like a robot, So you got to have something. You got to be able to move around, be smooth here, and then you can take it. Then we can talk about moving around the drums. Even if you take 16 notes and you go, So I talk about trying to move smoothly around the drums, but a lot of my stuff is trying to get everybody to read snare drum stuff.
Okay.
So I get everybody to go through like if they have never read before, I love the Roy Burns Elementary book.
Oh, wow.
I obviously the Wilcoxon books are great once you can get them there.
Yeah.
And then I have them work on a lot of just playing along the stuff. And it depends on the students, because I teach a lot of younger kids.
Sure.
It may not really be like jazz at all.
Sure.
So I'll just try to, but they kind of dig some of the, they kind of dig John Bonham. They did kind of so it's interesting. Young kids, their parents have the influence on them sometimes. They dig Bonham, and then I try to steer them a little bit into the jazz thing, So, and I'm about 50-50 in getting them over there. But
wow, that's pretty good. 50-50, that's pretty good in this day and age.
Yeah. So my philosophy is really trying to teach everybody to play the drums as well as they can play, so they can do whatever they want with the instrument.
Yeah.
If they want to play whatever they want. If they want to play in rock bands, and I have a lot of students that play around here in a lot of rock bands, and some that play in some jazz groups, So
wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's mainly my philosophy.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm curious, in your own practice these days, what are some of the things that you do as far as maybe just maintenance practicing and then more developmental type stuff? What are some of the things that you work on in your practicing?
Well, a lot of it is I really work with the cymbal beat. I still really try to work with. I tape myself. I actually have my iPhone. Every day I tape myself playing time.
Wow.
With my I have my iPhone set up over there, and my drums are here.
Uh-huh.
And so I just tape myself playing some time, and I'm listening for the clarity and just how the lope of the, I'm really into a loping kind of beat, and kind of trying to change the beat a little bit, here and there, try to work on varying the cymbal beat and not sounding too angular,
Yeah.
And what I'll do is I still go through my Wilcoxon, and I still go through all the books, and I work a lot with our mutual friend Kenny Washington, our buddy. Years ago he told me to do, and this is kind of how I teach too. This is another thing I try to do, have kids do, that he told me years ago to do, that really opened up things. That's why I always owe a lot. We both owe. We always talk about how much we love Kenny, because he's helped us, and he cares about us.
He does.
Making us things, and
absolutely.
So anyways, but he used to tell me to practice Wilcox and teach it bar by bar.
Yeah.
And so, and he also had me. He also said, play all the strokes, like the accented strokes, like at forte or fortissimo, and all the unaccented notes, as pianissimo. So I work on that. I still work on that.
Yeah.
And I work on it really super slow, and I try to get my students to do that, but. When I'm not home, I don't know how many of them are doing that when I'm not around.
It's also really hard to play that stuff like that.
It's very hard.
I mean, it's almost. This is something I mean, it's harder to play slow than it is to play fast. And
absolutely.
And I think that totally extends to playing that kind of rudimental literature, because everything is on display. Your time, your sound. Everything, your control, it's all, you got to have it all together. So it's a great thing to do, but is it challenging? It's really hard.
Man, I'm still working at it.
Me too. Me too.
every time I see Wash, I said, "Man, Kenny, man, still doing modern Flamax."
That's right. That's right. That's right. Flamax and fantasy.
Or Flamax and fantasy, or man, rolling a rhythm.
Rolling a rhythm.
Yeah, because I've had a lot of my students I've sent to him at purchase, over the years, and it's good because he gives those guys. He does a great job, and he's such a great teacher.
He is.
And he does a great job at getting these guys to listen to the music and to know them. And he's really, he's a no-nonsense guy who I've spent hours, like you, I've spent hours and hours hanging out in cars with that guy. I remember the last time he came with Bill Charlap and me, Peter Washington, and him. Well, Peter, it was funny because Bill goes he goes, yeah, man. He goes, well, he wanted me to give Penny back a ride back to the hotel. I go, oh, sure, no problem. I go, but I'll see you guys over there. He goes, no, we're going to this party. I go, no, but we'll see you in the parking lot. So 2 hours later, they show up and, Peter's got his hat and he's looking over at us like this. And so he comes in and joins. So it's already 2.5 hours of talking about.
Yeah, man. That's the fellowship, man. That's important.
Yeah, and then Peter got in, and so that was great with him and Peter because they love each other so much, and they shared so much music together, and with the greats, and so they would tell a lot of stories,
Yeah, for sure.
About playing with Griff, about playing with Tommy Flanagan, and so then talking even with bass. I always love to talk to like bass players, like with I was talking with Peter about what he liked, how likes the sound of the bass, what he's into, and it's just great to hear that perspective,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, when it comes,
that was helpful.
Yeah, no, that's all, man. That's great stuff. When it comes to listening, that's something that you and I talk about all the time. And I wanted to sort of hit on what's a few of the most influential recordings have been for you as a drummer, things that have really sort of, made, the difference in your life and your career as a player.
Well, I would say the first one is Kelly at Midnight, Wynton Kelly, Paul Chambers. That's probably almost a lot of drummers were,
Sure.
That, just
that's
Philly
such a great
Joe.
record.
Yeah, it's and Kenny told me that was Philly Joe's favorite record.
Yeah, apparently that was true. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and man, that's just, I put on Potluck and I go through everything and I have, it's great to have been able to have my students learn that solo from me and then they go through with Kenny too. So, it's so they learn, his fours and the solo and the chorus, but anyways, that one, one that my father used to play the Pepper Adams, Donald Byrd from the Half Note with Lex Humphreys a lot.
Oh man, yeah, that's a great record. Yes, yes,
and man, to Lex, that is so swinging. It's so, and
he was such an unsung master, Lex Humphreys. He was so great, man.
Oh man, yes. So I still listen to that. I mean, obviously, I listen to all those records, but that was, I will say, really, Janine especially, I got to love that tune, especially as soon as I heard it. My father would keep playing it over and over because he loved Donald Byrd,
Yeah.
He goes, Donald Byrd, man. He goes, and so we used to listen to Donald and Pepper,
Yeah.
And I get it to where I used to try to memorize all the solos,
Sure.
Off those records. So, but listening to Lex's beat and how it danced like that. But it was so different. It was different, yet it still, all those guys had the same kind of, as man, that cymbal beat just bounced, man. It all had they had this certain vibe of bouncing and swinging.
Yeah.
But it's all swung so hard. And it's hard to even just, some people say, oh, he was the best or he was the best. I don't know if you can say a best. But
I don't think there's a best. There's
I love them all.
Yeah, and at that level, it's what are you in the mood for today?
Yeah, there you go.
It's just a different perspective. One of the things, speaking of both Philly Joe and Lex Humphreys in those records, especially Kelly at Midnight, one of the things that record did for me was it showed me how interesting and important the piano drum relationship is. We so often talk about our relationship with the bass player, which is of course important, but with the guitar or piano, that's a really important musical relationship, you know?
Absolutely. Well, you know, the thing is, when we're comping on the snare drum,
Right.
you know, I remember reading an article, an interview with Billy Higgins one time. He was talking about playing like the chordless stuff, you know, he used to do. And he used to think, he says, you know, I think of my left hand on the snare drum as like a pianist comping.
Wow.
You know, and he said, you know, and the one thing that hit home to me, he says, you know, you got to be careful as a drummer, your left hand that you're hooking up with the piano player, because, you know, sometimes piano players, I find some of them, they'll overcomp, you know, they play so much stuff that they comp into a corner where there's no space with the left hand to put your left. So it's all, you know, and I'm sure piano players say the same about drummers. It's not any particular, it's,
absolutely.
Piano drummers can overcomp with that snare drum, you know.
That's that relationship. That's it.
We're talking about, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And it seems like Wynton Kelly, he had good relationships with a bunch of drummers, but I mean, did. Philly Joe, that was a wonderful hookup. And of course, you mentioned Billy Higgins, like him and the great Cedar Walton. It's like those are such incredible. Yeah, there's such incredible relationships. And you've spent time with a lot of those great drummers like Billy Higgins, and we've talked about some of this before. And you know, I've been able to do that somewhat myself, but you being a little older than I, you've been able to do it more. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of those guys like Billy Higgins or the one that we talk about a lot, the great Ray Mosca, who a lot of people don't really know about, and I think they should. So, you know, please enlighten us.
Well, you know, Ray is a guy that he was a family friend to my father's. He got to be real close because, you know, there was a few clubs here, obviously, in all cities that used to have jazz was everywhere. So for, you know, at least in Rochester it was. But so Ray would come up with Monty Alexander and Eugene Wright would play bass, you know. So they got to be really close friends. Even the senator, Eugene Wright, used to come to our house all the time.
Wow.
So Ray was a very, very tough love guy, man. He was, man, there'd be times when, you know, he'd be, if he didn't like somebody, man, he'd let you know it, you know?
Wow.
So I remember him being at the house when I was a little guy, you know, and he was a sweetheart though. That's the one thing. He's a sweet, very gracious with his time. And he really, you know, I remember one time I was at his place in Long Island, and he was really, he was he's still very, very close with Roy Haynes. Like Roy and him were very close. In fact, Roy actually got Ray like a modern drummer, like a full-fledged thing in modern drummer.
Oh wow, I didn't know that.
Maybe 15 years ago, and he says he says you got to do something on this guy because this guy is like, man, everybody knows he's played with more guys than just and Ray really did. He played with I mean the who's who of, he was just a little underground, you know. But he like Hank Jones told my brother Tom, he says, you know, he says Ray is probably the drummer I worked with the most in my career.
Really?
That's what he told. Yeah, and I was at Ray's house, and I'm seeing like, man, this week at Birdland, he used to play some of those Monday nights at Birdlands with the piano player, and he played with Sonny Clark. He played with all these, and so I'm looking at these, I'm like, oh my God.
Wow.
You know? And then, and so, but to further this here a little quicker, with Ray, what he did was, you know, he would try to get me to just play some, he had me play a long roll one time, and open to close, you know. Mm-hmm. And so, when I was playing, you know, back then I was using a lot more arm this way, you know. And so, and I was playing like, and then I would open it back up like this. And he goes, and I remember he goes, okay, man, great. He goes, now try using some wrist, because that would help. He goes, what is this? I go, well, you know. I go, Ray, man, I'm 17 or 18, you know.
I'm trying.
So he goes, all right. He goes, well, man, let's get this. He goes, the one thing he did that always stuck with me was he said, think upwards. Because he studied with Papa Joe. He was out in Henry Adler, you know. So he said, man, up like this, upwards.
Wow.
Upward, out, everything's this way. He goes, don't play into the drum, play out of the drum like this. And he goes, I'm not talking about yanking a sound out of it. That's not, he goes, you just get more sound when you play this way.
Wow.
When you play with compressed strokes, I think he called it, when you're compressing your strokes and play into the drum, and he goes, that's what Papa Joe used to say, man, everything was like this.
Wow.
And so Ray really was, and if some of those records you can really, and I mean, witnessed it, man. I witnessed him playing. I mean, his hands were like, he had like those hands of like Papa. I mean, he really could play the brushes like, man. I mean, unbelievably, I mean,
I mean, those records that he's on, he sounds really magnificent. I would love to see a really good video of him playing. Are there any out there that you know of? I would love to see it.
There's one video that he plays. There's nothing that comes to mind from the old days. I wish there was.
Yeah.
But there is, it's funny. There's a video with him playing in the 90s with Wynton Marsalis. It's like he was playing this thing. It was like this tribute to Louis Armstrong, the Orval Shaw put together this thing. But they play Cherokee, So they're trading with Wynton, So they're trading fours, I think, with Wynton with his brushes. And man, it's just like,
oh, I got to see that. That's amazing. Wow.
But you see the hands like, and then they go to to get back to the head, and I'm thinking, oh man, give it to Ray. And so, but Wynton was really like this the whole time. He's looking at him real serious, like,
wow.
Because I'm sure he obviously knew who Ray was.
Yeah,
Ray is, So,
right.
But he was. But man, the brushes were just. I mean, he was a master brush player. He was really one of the guys that. In fact, I know, and I think I've told you this. Vernel Fournier had said, "I wish I had the career and I could play the brushes like Ray."
Wow, I never knew that. My
brother Tom, who was very close with Vernel, man. I tell people that they don't believe. I go, look, my brother spent like hours, hundreds with Vernel, and they used to play on snare drums together with. He said,
wow.
That's how great Ray Mosca really was. He doesn't play anymore. He's not in great health, but he was. I learned a lot from him because he always talked about just the brushes, how to play certain brush patterns, but mainly it was the strokes. He says, when you play Wilcoxon, you got to play everything. Think of it open. Don't think of it like everybody closes those drags like wrong. And
right.
So. In Higgins, I got to spend some time with Billy one time in Toronto. I went up for a few nights and we got to hang out. And man, I just remember being I couldn't believe. I think that's the best drumming I ever heard live.
Wow.
I mean, he was playing with Cedar and David Williams.
Mm.
And man, that's the first time I ever heard anybody. And it was in the 91 it was. I remember the year. That's right. 91. And it was the first time I ever heard a drummer play between mallets and sticks and brushes, I mean, he played firm roots, and he played this open soul. And me and my friend were there. I was there with a buddy of mine. We were like, oh my God. And I was sitting literally I could touch his ride cymbal.
Mm.
So I got this like drum lesson all night. I mean, he was playing and he had some hands on him, man. People don't realize the hands Billy had.
Yeah, he did.
And the creativity that was coming out. I mean, it was just, he could play, he would play, he wasn't afraid to go,
yeah.
Played like for like through the whole, just keep going with it. And then, and so I remember just talking to him about just, Kluk, who was his man. That was really his man. And he loved Max too. But, but he was, that night, I remember he was really, obviously, Billy Higgins. I mean, he was an innovator. But, man, he was really coming out of Philly Joe, hard Philly Joe. Like, all the stuff. I was
language,
like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, wow. But it sounds just, I mean, it's coming through, it's filtering out of Billy Higgins,
Sure.
So,
yeah.
And man, I just remember going up to him and just talking about records. And he was really, really sat there for we sat for a while talking, because he just could, he was kind of surprised that I knew all about all his records. And, that's two Maryland's Dilemma that I love to play.
Yeah.
I asked him, I go, man, we play that two Maryland's Dilemma in Rochester. And he goes, really? He goes, I wrote that in high school. He goes, I didn't know anybody even knew that tune. So
wow, man.
He goes, I wrote that. You wrote that in high school? Oh my God. So it was just great to be able to talk to him about that and about Sonny Clark, because I love Sonny.
Sure.
So much. And he just said Sonny's death really tore him apart,
Wow.
So, and he says, man, yeah, boy, and he just talked a lot about, the cymbals, trying to find cymbals that fit all keys.
Wow.
He says it's really hard to find cymbals that fit all keys, because,
Wow.
he goes, it's hard to find a great cymbal, he goes, it's really hard to find, and think about them as those, everything's a ride cymbal, you play the hi-hat, I think Billy really mainly, the thing I got mainly from him is, don't think about the drums as the drums. Like, he used to play on phone books at Bradley's, right? That's the famous stories of him playing on, right?
Yeah.
With brushes. I don't think he thought, I think he could have went on a gig with a floor tom. It sounded great.
Yeah, right.
It just, so he kind of talked a little bit about that, just don't worry about the drums so much. Think about just making it happen. You could have a floor. Don't think about it as a floor tom,
Yeah.
He kind of didn't really tell me that, but he was kind of,
that's what he was saying.
And so he learned a lot about that. And then we talked a lot about the guys like Joe Romano. He loved Joe Romano.
Wow.
And he loved JR, and he wondered what he didn't see. He goes, oh man, those guys, man, wow. He goes, now those are those guys really could. I mean, he was really, really loved them. So
wow.
So it was fun to be able to. There's a bunch of stuff but that's the main thing.
Yeah, that's beautiful, man.
Yeah.
Well, we have a few minutes left, and I kind of wanted to end with talking about you as a band leader, because you've made several recordings as a band leader, and you have a brand new one that's out. Figured it'd be a good chance for you to talk about that. But could you talk a little bit about how you got into making your own records?
Oh yeah. Well, there's a great piano player here named Paul Hoffman, and Paul he's made a lot of records before. I mean, just kept putting his stuff out, a lot of solo piano stuff and a lot of stuff. And he goes, you really need to do your own record. And I go, I don't want to do that,
Yeah.
But he goes, no, really. I go, all right, I'll do it, So I did my first one, and it was, I enjoyed the experience so much,
Yeah.
Because, that really brought my hunger level even to another level, because I was thinking, okay, this sounds all right, it's okay, but man, I could do a lot better than that.
Yeah.
So then I did another one, about 3 years later, 3 years later. And I said, that's a little better, so just each one I felt kind of myself and everybody kind of, I heard we were all growing,
Sure.
Which is why you make records, it's so,
yeah.
So, I've had about 6 or 7 out, and the last one, the brand new one that just came out is called "The Swing Is the Thing," and it's on Cellar Live. Yep. And it has a lot of my favorite cats, like Grant Stewart, the tenor player, who was really one of my favorite musicians of all time, I think, and Joe Magnarelli, who I have a big history with on trumpet because he's from Syracuse. We've been playing
speaking of great upstate New York guys, absolutely.
Yeah, so Mags is playing, and Jed Patton, the great pianist who played with the Heath Brothers for so long, and I have played with these guys. I played with Mags and Grant and Neil Miner, the bass player. He's on a lot of my records,
Absolutely.
Neil and I always feel he's a guy that he's just, boy, you talk about great time, great intonation. He plays great solos, loves just to play with no amp. Gets a big sound. He's just everything. He's like a dream for me,
Sure, absolutely.
We have really, really such a mutual want to say a great meeting of where the quarter note, just
Yes.
a good, nice hookup, you know.
You do.
So when this thing, I figured I with this one, I wanted to include more of those guys, my band members' original compositions, you know.
Nice.
So I said, I always loved the way Magnarelli wrote tunes, and I've recorded some of them, and Neil I've always included in there. And then there's I have to mention this too. There is a great tenor player in the UK by the name of Ocean Roberts. There's this guy, Ocean Roberts is he's a serious tenor, but he's not like local. I mean, this guy can really play. And there's also this trumpet player, Steve Fishwick, who's over there, who's incredible. I mean, they play as good as anybody anywhere. I mean, they really do.
Yeah.
So, and I played the festival with them, and I've gotten to be really good friends with them. But we do a version of Lush Life on that, and that's Oceans. You know, he let me record that.
It's a great arrangement.
Yeah. So I always try to pick lesser known tunes.
Sure.
And tunes I know that would fit those guys. And I figured, what better way to make a nice record, because we don't rehearse for it, than to pick some of the band leaders, because they know their music. And these guys all play togeture a lot.
Sure.
So they played these tunes. So
yeah.
And then the one tune I did bring in was our Turrentine.
Yes.
Tommy Turns. You said it in Big Red.
Big Red, yeah. And those are great, man. Thank you for recording those,
Oh, man. You kidding me, man? Those are always, You Said It was a tune that really hit me.
Yeah.
When I first heard it. But anyways, so I'm really proud of it. I like it. It's been getting a lot of airplay,
Good,
tons
man.
of airplay. So, and I've been doing like a lot of things for it. I've been having a lot of people call me up, and that, which I appreciate, like you said, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
And, so that's pretty much, in a nutshell, kind of how I got to be into making my own records. Plus I like having control over the music.
Sure. That can be a good thing.
So it's like, I'm not playing tunes I may not love, so I'm playing everything I do. I really like the tunes. I love the tunes. And so I said, and like I said, it's just good to just document yourself on recordings this one was a really good one. So I feel it's a good one. So,
I think it is too, man. Everybody should go check it out. Everybody should get a copy of it for sure.
Yeah, please.
Man, thank you so much, man, for taking the time to come and talk to us, man. It's really great to hear your history and your ideas behind what you do, man. It's such a pleasure to be your friend, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh man, the feeling is mutual, Tom. It's like how I feel about you and your playing, man. To me, you're one of the best out there, man.
I appreciate it so much, man.
And that is it for this week's episode. Special thanks to Tom for coming in and doing the interview. Hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, please give us a 5-star rating, type us a review in iTunes, Spotify, hit some comments on the YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. Make sure you're following us on Instagram and Facebook. And make sure you're following the Drum Click. Don't want you to miss anything. And hit me up at drumcandypodcast@gmail.com with any show suggestions, any listener beats. I need some listener beats, so send them over there. You can send me a video or just an MP3. Any questions you'd like us to address. And then other than that, we'll be back next week. So have a good one and see you then.